everyone, this is Mrs. Gelling. In this video, we are going to review Module 5, Lessons 1 through 3, and Module 5, Lab 1. Our goal by the end of this video is to be able to summarize the modern art era and the sub-movements that emerged during that time, and then we will also identify and describe the key features of Impressionism. We're going to show our learning by completing Unit 5, Lab 1, where we're taking a closer look at Monet's art piece. So modern art, when we're thinking about when it started, was about the 1880s in our timeline of human history. That's about when the Statue of Liberty was made. If you are in history and learning about in world history or in American history, so we start to see some very historical innovations happening. Fun fact, the Christmas tree with the lights around it first emerged in the early 1880s. So we're starting to see a lot of culture kind of become redefined, as well as walking through some rather violent wars and some economic turmoil across the country. So for modern art, for this class, we are taking a look at American modern artists as well as mostly Western European artists. And so when we talk about modern art, we are talking about almost an era of time and different movements that made up modern art as a type of art. And so you'll see those listed here. Take a look at your extra credit. There is a question asking you what art movements happened during modern art. So please be sure to take a look at that list. We will be learning about most of those, though there are some sub-movements that we are not covering in this course. So if you are researching and end up with questions, please let me know. Now, modern art, kind of like I hinted, we aren't talking about any one type of art. Modern art kind of includes a lot of very different types of looking art and why the art was being made. So when we reflect on what we've learned so far in this course, we learned about medieval art and how much of that art revolved around Christian themes. Renaissance art, right, capturing realism and humanism together, really mastering proportion and making scenes look real. And then we also, Roman artists, were looking at art in terms of embedding spiritual beliefs and culture, as well as capturing historical events like military victories. We also saw in that civilization they used a bunch of different types of art to capture those things, but we all kind of identified those key characteristics, and they were all similar that were made during those movements. Now, modern art, we can see some visual examples here, can look very different from each other. And so that kind of defines modern art as a period instead of one movement itself. So Impressionism is more or less considered the first type of modern art that we see. And Impressionist artists really started to want to redefine what art looked like. Art doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to include religious themes. It doesn't have to reflect the artist. It can be made for whatever reason, by whatever means, and using whatever materials. You don't have to be a certain expert level to create art. And so modern artists really wanted to start paving the way to redefining what art is. So in modern art, just like those visual examples on that previous slide, we see a huge range visually of what it can look like. And that was various artists kind of working together and exploring what does it mean to create art. And so Impressionists kicked that off with kind of wanting to take an impression of what they are seeing. Society was starting to advance. We see cars and cities starting to be formed and lived in regularly. And Impressionists wanted to capture those scenes, things that were happening around them, or nature, right? Recalling back to the past. So Impressionist artists like Monet started to use very short strokes of color, painting outside and plein air, where we see artists painting outside, capturing a whole scene in one sitting. So we don't necessarily see a lot of details. Impressionist artists really focused on capturing light and shadows, making it look like an impression of a scene. You kind of have to look at the whole picture to see what you're looking at, because sometimes the pictures are not that clear, and that was done on purpose. They only had the daylight to capture their painting, right, without losing the colors that they wanted to use to capture the scene. And we also don't see a lot of mixing of colors. So Monet is very known for painting outdoor scenes, nature, and playing with the reflection in water. Now, as time passed, Monet became more and more interested in studying light and how light can be captured in an image. So one art piece that you can look at by him are the Rouen Cathedral series. It is actually a series of canvases, so multiple canvases. He went to the same spot every day throughout different times of the day, through different seasons, and he wanted to capture how the cathedral visually changed depending on the season and where the sun was in the sky during the day or in the evening. So he captured sunset, sunrise, all of those beautiful times of day. So it is a very interesting series to look at how color, shadows, and light can be used to display or portray different times in the season or during the day. Manet was another one with an A there that was very well known for Impressionist paintings. He really wanted to explore the composition or the full construction of the scene. Where can I place figures and objects in a painting to make it look real, capture that whole scene? But we're also kind of more or less trying to finish it in one setting. We're not coming back to it later. We want to really capture a whole scene as quickly as we can. And so when we're looking at that first painting at the party, we see a lot of different human figures. When we're looking at the positive space, right? The space that's toward us in the foreground that's closer, we see a lot of detail. We can see the lights and the shadows. We can somewhat see the facial features and the folds in the clothes. And then as you quickly look back into the background, figures and objects start to lose their detail. But again, he's using that impressionist feature of not a lot of detail, chunks of color. We don't see a lot of blending. We don't see a lot of descriptive lines, right? Outlines to objects. We are just kind of using what we see to build a scene based off what we know living in real life. As time went on, Manet started to really want to capture the composition of a painting in terms of focus and emphasis. So when we are looking at the barmaid here in the left-hand side, we see her in very strong detail. We can see the lace on her collar, on her jacket, the buttons. We can also see some details on the bottles that are on the counter, the fruit, the glass. So things again in the foreground and the central figure are very detailed. They almost look like there's a spotlight on them. And then as we look towards the background, we start to lose that detail rather quickly. We can kind of guess there's people sitting behind her. We see some chandeliers on the hanging from the ceiling on the background, but there's not a lot of detail. We're using again the real life experiences to make what we're seeing make sense based on the shapes and forms that we see. So Manet started with that full impressionist style, and then he kind of branched off into his own almost form of Impressionism, where we had a detailed central figure and a more undetailed background. The last artist that we are going to look at before we go over Unit 5, Lab 1 is Pierre Renoir, probably a very well-known artist name that you can at least recognize if you can't recall any of his art. He had the most noticeable change in his Impressionist style. So again, when he started painting with that group of Impressionists, they were again all focused on using unblended colors, really quick strokes. We're not going back to add detail, not a lot of descriptive lines. We're using context clues to see what we're looking at. And as he continued, he started also wanting to explore what a timeless painting would look like. So he started to realize, oh, no artists before have ever used the Impressionist style of this quick painting style. And what if they don't after, once this becomes not as popular? My work is going to look dated. When someone in the future looks at my paintings, they're going to know, oh, that's an Impressionist painting. And he didn't necessarily want to be boxed into that label. And so as he continued his artist career, he started to add more and more detail again to that foreground, the central figures. The bathers that we see at the top on the right hand side is very good examples of how his style changed. They're both of the same scene. It was a very popular activity back during this time to publicly bathe in the rivers in the city. And so we have women on the left. We can see them kind of in the meadow getting ready to jump in or finishing up their bath in the lake. We can make out their figures and that they're holding a towel. We can see the trees and the water, but everything looks quite blurry. It looks kind of smeared together and done very quickly. There's no detail. There's really no lines that we see in terms of description. It's all kind of just together in those general shapes and forms. And then we look at the right-hand side, the large bathers, and we see an enormous amount of detail, especially in the three figures in the foreground, our central figures, right? They're making a triangle, so we're also studying more about construction and balance and emphasis. Our eye is drawn to the center where the most detail is. We can see the shading and skin on the women, their hair, their eyelashes, and then again, as you kind of go towards the background, we start to lose that detail. We know that those are trees, we can kind of make sense of the scene, but we're using context clues. There's not a lot of detail once you get to the background, and that was done on purpose. We're drawing our most attention to the foreground and then making our way back into the scene. So last but not least, let's review Module 5, Lab 1, where we are taking a look at Claude Monet with an O, Monet, his painting Sunrise. Now this was one of the first Impressionist paintings, and I feel like it captures the characteristics of Impressionism very well. So let's reflect on what are common characteristics of Impressionist art. We should be thinking unblended colors, quick brush strokes, not very descriptive lines, loose organic shapes. So we might see some circles or triangles or squares, but for the most part we see general shapes of organic forms, people, objects, nature, that sort of thing. Impressionist art also was known to be made outdoors and in one scene or setting. So an artist set up their canvas, painted the scene, and then that painting was done. They did not go back and add any details, and they didn't brainstorm ahead of time either and make any sketches. They went with a blank canvas, finished their painting in a couple hours, and that was it. So now that we've reviewed those characteristics, let's take a look at this painting here. Now, unblended colors. We can see those colors individually. They do kind of look like they've been meshed together, but we don't see a lot of blending and easy transition of colors. We know that we're looking at water and the sky. There's a lot of blue in this painting. So when we think about what does it look like when we're near possibly a river or a lake during sunrise or sunset, when the sun starts to fade, everything does tend to look a little dark and shadowed. Whereas in full daylight, we might see the full colors. And so we can kind of use what we know to make sense of the scene. But in terms of what Monet has put onto the canvas, we do not see a lot of mixing of color. We see the bold orange, we see the different blues, and they're all making a scene, but they're not necessarily blended. We can also see visible short strokes in the painting. We can see where the paintbrush hit the canvas and where it stopped. We do not see a lot of careful planning. The artist looks like, especially in the trees and the clouds, that he was kind of moving quickly. And that makes sense. When the sun is setting, you don't have too long before the light goes out. So it makes sense that it was captured rather quickly and that we would see these brush strokes. And that's a very big characteristic of Impressionist paintings. We can also talk about the organic forms that we see. The trees, we know that those are meant to be trees. It makes sense in the scene, but do trees actually look like that in real life? No. We are using the organic forms and the placement to understand that those are trees. So we see organic forms also with the human figures and the boats on the river, as well as the shadows, and again the cloud in the sky. And you can also talk about the traditional geometric shape that you see, the sun. That's a very key point in the painting. Our eye goes straight there. It's almost glowing. So it's a perfect circle, which also stands out against every other shape that's in the painting is not a geometric shape. So we can also refer to that. And last but not least, this painting was made en plein air. It was made outside. So that is another characteristic of this painting being a good example of Impressionist art. If you have any questions or need any support, please feel free to reach out. I'm looking forward to reading your own perspective and analysis of Sunrise very soon. Have a good day.